addressing adolescent and youth perceptions of harm and the need for post-legal marijuana-specific education. So with legalization comes a need for an education to go along and at least parallel or even better precede the legalization rollout. I'm going the wrong way. So in Colorado, what we have seen since legalization and commercialization of cannabis is a decrease in the perception of harm among our youth, and combined with the legalization and increase in availability, we're seeing a perfect storm of an increase in youth use. And it depends on who you listen to. A lot of people will say that in Colorado we have not experienced a huge uptake in youth marijuana use. But truthfully, in the municipalities that have legalized marijuana, we have seen a significant increase. I come from a small mountain town with a tourist industry and a thriving marijuana industry, and we are seeing it among our youth because the decrease in the perception of harm, like it's no big deal, and then accessibility creates a perfect storm for kids to experiment with marijuana. And I think we'll probably see that in California as well, so that's why you're here. And we're going to initially talk about the perception of harm and why that decreases with commercialization and legalization of recreational marijuana. And again, I want to make a disclosure here. We have spent the last 2 years researching all this information. We've worked with certified addiction counselors as well as PhDs, and we all of our data comes from a pretty reputable source, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment Office of Retail Marijuana. So we've used a lot of that, and everything I'm speaking about here pertains to youth marijuana use. We really are unbiased as far as adult recreational marijuana use. We are not pro-marijuana, we're not con-marijuana, we're pro-education. So what we're seeing here is the Monitoring the Future National Survey results of drug use. And we're seeing a national perception of harm that's decreasing. And I know these numbers are hard for you to see, but here we start to see a decline in about 2011, and this is 2015. We're seeing across the board a perception of harm. And so we see the percentage of seeing great risk of using marijuana regularly is decreasing, and this is across the country. So this is not just in legalized states. And then obviously 12th grade with the most exposure has the lowest perception of harm. So student reporting, anecdotally, and we do find this across the board as well, students report the following regarding marijuana versus alcohol use. Marijuana is more readily available and easier to obtain than alcohol. Marijuana use is easier to disguise in school, at home, and in public. And certainly this is because there isn't that smell that you can get on the breath from alcohol. The high can be a little bit easier to hide. And marijuana produces a more favorable high than alcohol. There is not that hangover the next day, and there's not the vomiting when you overdose with marijuana. So youth really like the high typically more with marijuana than alcohol. Students report that marijuana is a healthier choice than alcohol, and we're going to see why as we go through this presentation. And students report believing that they're better drivers when under the influence of marijuana than alcohol. And so they're saying that they're better drivers if they're high than drunk. And actually, a lot of the students I've worked with would say that they are better drivers high than sober. And when I see them on the roads, I live in a small town. I take the nearest exit because they would be saying that they'd have their pipe right next to them, and then they hit it before they go driving because they think they're a better driver, and they can focus better. So we're going to play a little Mythbusters here. This is the theme of our PowerPoint. And it's important to address the myths and misconceptions about adolescent, and I'm also going to include youth, marijuana use. So our first myth that we're going to look at, myth number 1, we hear that marijuana use really doesn't affect me. It's no big deal. It's not affecting me. And we're going to demonstrate how that's incorrect. So bear with me while I do a little brain discussion here, and I really geek out on the brain stuff. During adolescence, not since birth has the brain had so much rapid growth and capacity for change as it does during adolescence. So neuroplasticity refers to the ability of the brain to change its structure and function. It's like a plastic, not a hard plastic, but a silly putty kind of brain that we have when we're in adolescence. And the growth and change begins during puberty. And again, this is in early elementary to mid-elementary, the brain is pretty static. But once we enter adolescence, it becomes a lot more plastic and fluid. So the growth and change begins during early adolescence and goes into our early 20s. And during this time, what happens is the process of pruning and myelination occur. And I'm going to do a little description, and then we're going to get to the weeds. Okay, so we have synaptic pruning. And synaptic pruning refers to the process where extra neurons in the brain and synaptic connections are eliminated in order to increase efficiency. Okay, so let me describe this. Let me show you here. This is our brain when we are in our early to mid-adolescence. We are thinking about a million different things, and we're pretty good at a lot of stuff. We're not exceptional at single things, but we're pretty good at a lot of things in adolescence. So let's just say I'm creating a town, and my house is up here, and the grocery store is down here. And I have all of these different ways to get to the grocery store from my house. I have this way, and I have this way. I could go any certain way that I want to. And some might be better than others. Let's equate this to the adolescent brain. So if I'm an adolescent and I'm trying to decide, I know I want to play an instrument, I'm just not quite sure which one I'm going to play and I'm going to do. So I'm going to learn how to play the guitar. I'm also going to learn how to play the piano. I'm also going to maybe dabble in violin. So I'm pretty good at a lot of them. Here's the guitar path, here's the piano path, and here's the violin path. I'm pretty good at a lot of them, but I'm going to keep practicing, and then by about 15, 16, I'm going to decide which instrument I'm going to play, and I'm going to get really good at that. So then what happens is you lose all of those other roads. I'm just going to work on the guitar, and here's my guitar neural pathway. The piano and the violin have gone away. So that's called pruning. You can apply it to language or anything else, sports, anything else that adolescents are working on and getting good at. So during adolescence, our brain is pruning all of those extra roads and finding one clear path. And as adults, you can understand this, because if any of you are trying to learn an instrument or a language in adulthood, your paths are already pretty established. You're forging a new path, which your brain is not as plastic to do so. In adolescence, you can do all of those, and then whatever you continue to do into adulthood, you'll actually retain pretty well. You can pick up a guitar 20 years later and play it, and that's that neural pathway that you established. That's because all of the other stuff has gone, and you have a pretty strong neural pathway. So that's the pruning piece. Now, that happens from about 10 to about 16. We're pruning and we're finding what our niche is and what really works in our brain and what we like to do, and we travel that path often. So it starts to prune, the other stuff goes away. And then what happens is something called myelination. And myelination is the paving of the roads. So once we have that neural pathway all set and established and used, then we start to pave it. And by myelination, when we myelinate those neural pathways, it helps that brain path function 3,000 times faster than if it wasn't myelinated. All right? So I'm going to get to why we're talking about this here. So there's the myelination. You form the myelin sheath around the nerve and allows the nerve impulses to move more quickly. So myelination, pruning needs to occur, and then myelination. And then we're moving on to being an adult who is capable of doing things. So the way this works in the prefrontal cortex, this is the front part of our brain, and this is in charge of a bunch of functions that are essential in adulthood, and we'll look at those next. But if our brains develop from brainstem, we have our brainstem developing in utero, right? Because our brainstem is in charge of respiration and heart rate. So we need that when we're born. We can't have this underdeveloped. And then our brain continues to develop from the back to the front. So our memories are right in this part, which is why we don't start to have memories until we're about 3 or 4 years old. Because this isn't developed when we're born. That's why we don't remember birth or infancy. And so once we develop this, we can start to have memories. Then this starts to develop, and then this is the last part to develop. And this isn't finally developed until you're about 25 years old, that prefrontal cortex. So our adolescents are still in the process of developing this prefrontal cortex. And that prefrontal cortex is in charge of this working memory and the reasoning, flexibility, problem solving, planning, execution, also time management, impulse control, all things that are really important to be a successful adult in society. That's why we ask our adolescents to do a lot of things. Some of these things can be tricky. Their brains aren't fully developed in that part, in that region that's in control of these parts. So, how does this apply to marijuana? We have something called the endocannabinoid system in our brain, and it is named after the cannabis plant. So in the 1960s, researchers looked at the cannabis plant and found 60-some molecules in the plant that they were able to identify. So 2 of those was THC, and then the other one was CBD. And I'll be referring to those later. And I'm not going to pronounce them because, as I told the counselors, I can pronounce them correctly like once a week. And I already did pronounce them correctly, but I'll try. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD is cannabidiol. Okay, right? Okay. So we have those, the cannabis plant, then we didn't even find out how it worked in the brain until 20 years later when they were able to look in our brain and say, oh, this part of the brain, which we're going to call the endocannabinoid system, receives cannabis plants. And so the part of our brain, the endocannabinoid system, is named after the cannabis plant. So we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain heavily in these areas. This prefrontal cortex, where we're in charge of judgment and all those other executive functioning skills. Some in movement and sensation, a lot in coordination, a bunch in this memory center, and a bunch in this reward center. So those are all the places where where THC can affect the brain. Now, there's only a tiny few in that brainstem. And again, the brainstem is in charge of respiration and heart rate. So if you have youth who are coming to you and saying you can't overdose on weed, you have to take 20 tons of marijuana to have an overdose effect, it's actually true. And part of what we like to do to empower kids is tell them the truth about marijuana as well, because that's really important. You can't die from an overdose of marijuana because it won't control, there's nothing that it does to your respiration and heart rate, unlike opiates, where there's a ton, opiates can really affect that brainstem, so it can shut down your heart, it can shut down your breathing, and that's how you overdose on opiates. One thing we do ask our youth is, how do you die from an overdose of marijuana? If it's affecting our judgment, we're going to get in a car and we're going to have a car accident. If it's affecting our, if we're ingesting and we're hallucinating, then it's going to cause us to have judgment and potential hallucinations that are going to lead us to jumping out a window or running into traffic. Because as we saw, it affects the judgment part of our brain too. And when you consume an edible, then what happens is there's a change of the molecule when it goes through the liver, and once that changes, the incidence of hallucinations are higher. So you're more likely to hallucinate when you have an edible. If you're more likely to hallucinate, you're more likely to do something that's going to, it could potentially cause you to have an injury that could result in death. And that's how we die of marijuana use. And it's happening more and more as marijuana levels are going up and as we are taking different forms of marijuana. All right, so bear with me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the receptors in the brain. And this gets a little cool if you're brainy, and complicated if you don't like the brain stuff. So we have neurotransmitters in our brain going off all the time. And those are the messengers that send a certain message to the brain. And then we have the receiver. And the neurotransmitter and the receiver fit perfectly together, okay? So they're receivers designed for specific neurotransmitters. Anandamide, this is the big long A word, is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter in our brain, okay? So anandamide is, ananda means Sanskrit, in Sanskrit means bliss. Anandamide is a neurotransmitter that is in charge of regulating sleep and mood and anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. So anandamide is naturally produced in the brain. It's a natural neurotransmitter. So it is that blue right there in the picture. THC is the substance or the compound in the cannabis plant that mimics anandamide. And so the way it works, they look almost identical molecularly, okay? So we have anandamide here, and then we have the THC molecule here. Now bear with me, I'm from Colorado, so I like to look at it this way. If I have a Denver Bronco foam finger here, and we're the good guys, the Broncos are the good guys, just letting you guys know. And I have a foam finger, and I stick it into something that's going to match that foam finger. It's going to receive it perfectly. It is going to create a blissful effect. It's a good sort of thing. If I have my Raiders foam finger, it looks structurally just exactly the same. It looks like a foam finger, but it's a drastically different team, right? So I put that in my receiver, and things are going to happen that I don't like. So it's similar to when you have the anandamide in the brain, things are good. Nothing's getting overloaded, we're happy, it's all good. When you introduce the THC, the brain thinks it's getting anandamide because they look exactly the same to the receiver, but it's drastically different. So it's like taking, when you would use anandamide, it's like a little chisel effect. I'm sort of modifying the behavior, and I'm making someone feel good if they're anxious or whatever. That's what anandamide does. THC will come in there, and the brain will think it's anandamide, but the THC comes in with a sledgehammer and changes the behavior. So that's how the THC works in the brain. And then what happens, well, I'm going to save this. Hold on. I'll save that for later. So we look at SPECT scans here. And this one over here looks like a nice plastic brain. This is what we want. This is the brain we all want. And if you're in this room and you're about 18 and younger and you're not abusing substances, this is what your brain looks like. Lucky you, okay? You haven't had a lot of traumatic brain injury. You haven't had a lot of environmental nor substance abuse that's going to impact your brain. When we look at these are showing a nice, well-rounded brain that has good activity and good blood flow. Now, our brain over here on the other side has what looks like holes in it. They're not actually holes. They're areas of the brain that are experiencing low activity and low blood flow. So they're not holes in the brain, but what these images demonstrate is low activity and low blood flow. So over here is our substance abuser's brain, all right? So we can see that this part of the brain is not very active, not a lot of blood flow going on here. So here we have the brain, and these are all from the Amen clinic, so we're very lucky to have them. Here we have the brain of an 18-year-old who has been using when he was 15. This person started using when he was 15, self-identifies using about 4 times a week, all right? So in the prefrontal cortex, we can see the low activity and blood flow. And if we are in the process of myelinating our brain and pruning, but we're not giving the brain the blood and the activity it needs to do that myelination, then we're going to have some long-term effects to that prefrontal cortex. And again, that prefrontal cortex is in charge of the executive functioning skills that are oh so important when you are an adult, that time management, that impulse control. So we have a student here who is rolling the dice with that prefrontal cortex because of his marijuana use. And as a result, there is low blood flow and activity. So the myelination is not going to occur at the same levels and as effectively as if he weren't using the substance. So we have that prefrontal cortex, and then here are the temporal lobes, and that's the memory and some behavior stuff that's going on there. So we can see some significant impact there. Next, we see an older brain. What we're looking at here is a 28-year-old who started using marijuana when he was 18. So our previous user started using when he was 15. This guy started using when he was 18, so he has 3 more years of brain development on this guy. So this guy's brain, because of age and potentially some environmental factors, is not quite as plastic, but we'd expect to see that from a 28-year-old. But this guy uses about, I think self-identified about every weekend, and has been using for 10 years. Okay, so he started using when he was 18, 28 years old now, using every weekend for 10 years. So we can see a drastically different image here as far as the holes on the brain, or the blood flow. So what this person did is bought himself 3 years of after delaying his use, he bought himself a much more effective, yet still impacted prefrontal cortex. Now imagine if this person would have waited until he was, say, 25, when that front of his brain was actually completely developed, we'd probably see even less of an impact there with that activity and blood flow. So the reason why we want to talk about delay, and of course we always want to talk about abstain, but if we're talking about anything, we can be talking about delay. This is a 15-year-old or 18-year-old who is much more impacted in that prefrontal cortex than our 18-year-old or 28-year-old who started when he was 18. So that 3 years gave him some extra time to let his brain develop. Okay. So we'll go back to that pruning and myelination. If we are not allowing blood flow and activity to happen in the brain because marijuana is affecting that blood flow and that activity, then we're not going to have efficient and effective pruning and myelination at that really, really essential time. It's the last, what's called the last golden age of brain development. You don't get that time back. So if you're heavily using between the ages of 15 and 20, you're going to impact the pruning and the myelination that's going on in your brain. And that's going to impact you for the rest of your life. Now, you can always get it back in small ways. So this is an image of a brain of a heavy user, not just marijuana. This is several substances. And here is the brain after 1 year of abstinence. Now, we can see that the brain has increased its blood flow and activity in this image, and that's a good thing. But this is abstinence. This isn't switching weed for beer or switching weed for pills. This is absolutely nothing, and it's allowing that brain to increase its blood flow and activity. This is also not, I'm going to use just a little bit. This is abstinence. And so what we see here is the brain has a remarkable ability to recover. However, there are molecular changes that have happened that we can't see on here. All this is showing is the blood flow and the activity has returned. But we, from the last slide, know that the myelination and the pruning has probably been compromised. So the brain can look like it's better, and it probably, there's more capacity there. But the myelination of the early use, if you lose that myelination and pruning opportunity, then you're going to have, it won't be completely repaired. Okay, so back to myth number 1, marijuana use doesn't really affect me. It's busted. We're going to bust it. Because as we can see, significant heavy marijuana use can definitely affect our brain. All right, so myth number 2, it's fine because it's natural. It grows from the ground. If it didn't grow from the ground, why would God put it on earth? I've heard it all with my kids, it's just fine. So, we have THC levels that have been on the rise since the early 1980s. And again, THC is that psychoactive ingredient. This is why we use marijuana to get high, right? The THC part. And CBD, which is the non-psychoactive active ingredient, has remained pretty consistent because why would you want CBD? What does CBD have to do with any sort of getting high? And that's the whole reason why we're smoking marijuana. So the CBD has stayed relatively solid. And this only goes to 2011 because I will talk to you in a second about what CBD is doing now. But THC has been on the rise early 1980s. And my question for the audience is, what happened in the early 80s that would have increased the levels of THC in the marijuana that we smoke? Cheech and Chong. Any other ideas? What's that? AIDS. I haven't heard that one, but hydroponics?
War on drugs.
Yes, who said that? Yes, you got it. So the war on drugs started in the early 80s. So everybody who was growing their pot outside could get in a lot bigger trouble if they got caught growing their pot, right? So what they did, being smart little hippies as they were, brought it inside. And they grew it under 24-hour grow lamps, and they used hydroponics. And so all of a sudden, they were creating these amazing strains where they could get the THC levels to go up and up and up. So that's what happened to get the THC levels. And right now, in the 2011, it's saying average was about 10%. We're going to talk a little bit about what it's at now. And so now, if we were to look at it, we probably see CBD going up as well, because we are looking at all kinds of cool medicinal benefits of the CBD. And while I'm talking about this, I want to mention that marijuana is classified, cannabis is classified as a Schedule I substance by the federal government. Now, I didn't know this, so I'm going to divulge for a second. So Schedule I substance classification means that the federal government sees zero medicinal value to the substance and a high propensity and likelihood to be abused and addiction. So what else is classified as a Schedule I is a psilocybin, an LSD, heroin, and peyote. So marijuana is also classified. Schedule II is meth and cocaine. So Schedule II is actually a lesser classification than Schedule I. And then it goes on to look at other, more over-the-counter or pharmaceutical type of drugs. And then, of course, tobacco and alcohol aren't even on the schedule. And so the federal government still sees marijuana as a very highly addictive, non-medical, no medicinal value substance. And we can go into all of that later if you have 2 hours afterwards. But as a result, CBD, which is not psychoactive at all and can have some pretty decent medical benefits, is also classified as a Schedule I substance by the federal government. So here we have THC concentrates, and this is really important for those of you who are now navigating post-Prop 64. And what we have here, we have shatter, and we have oil, and we have wax, and we have butter. And these are all concentrates of the marijuana plant. So when I tour a dispensary, and I've toured a couple in Colorado, you have 40,000 square feet warehouse of growing weed, right? And so you have all the plants from all different stages in their life and their life cycle, and then you go to one corner of the grow operation, and it's about 750 square feet. And what they do in there, it's explosion proof, and what they do in there is they take all the trim and all the leaves from the marijuana that has the terpenes on it, that has a lot of the THC, and they pack it in a cylinder. And there's new and innovative ways to do this, but this is pretty much the classic, typical way. They pack it in a cylinder, and then they pour liquid butane in there. And what the liquid butane does is it releases the terpenes, the THC molecules from the leaves, and then it all drips out into what this shatter-looking stuff at the bottom. It almost looks like honey. And then they cook off the liquid butane. And this is why it's explosion-proof, right? Because if you're cooking butane, you're looking for trouble. And but this is certainly an operation that is more than legal in Colorado. And I'm imagining concentrates are going to be very lucrative here in California. In that 750 square foot corner of this grow operation, he makes about 40% of his revenue, and that is usually to people 40 years old and under. So the concentrates, this shatter right here, can run about 90 to 98% THC. So in our previous picture, our previous graph, it showed us tapering off average about 10% with the plant. When you do it this way, and this is more than legal in Colorado, you are getting about 90 to 95% THC. So with the students I'm working with, they would maybe smoke a bowl before school, maybe smoke a bowl at lunch, but when they really wanted to party on the weekends, they were dabbing with the shatter. And it's the equivalent of maybe having a beer versus having a couple of shots of absinthe in the way it works in the brain. It's just, it's just a much higher high. And what has always happened when you have a plant that combines cannabis, CBD and THC is the CBD will mellow out the psychoactive effects of the THC. But when you have something like this with 98% THC, there's not much room for CBD. So you have a very, very profound high. And so this is some significant partying the kids are doing on the weekend, and they are, and the hangover and the residual effects are quite enormous there. So we have the shatter, and believe me, I have students who try to do this at home too. I did have a student who ended up blowing up his kitchen because he put his shatter in the oven. And so certainly it's something to be aware of. There's a lot of home attempts to do this. And then you have the oil, which is another concentrate, and that can run anywhere from 50 to about 80% THC. The wax is like the shatter, it's a little less refined, and then the butter, and these can run anywhere from about 50 to 80% too, depending on how concentrated you want it. Butter a little less so, it's combined with fats. So this is what you can often bake with. So how do you dab, you ask? All right, so we have a dabbing device. So if we have our shatter here, we go to the dispensary and we buy a tiny little corner of that, about the size of my fingernail, maybe smaller. And that's enough for me and about 6 friends to get really, really high on a Saturday night. And what I do is I put the shatter in this little spot, and I heat this titanium nail with this torch, and I get it nice and hot, and then I put the titanium nail right there on my concentrate, and it vaporizes. So again, there's not a combustion process. It vaporizes, and then I inhale it. And so you're inhaling a very, very strong form of THC. So this is a dabbing device, again, sold in dispensaries, and used quite often with those concentrates. So then we have vape pens. So this is the most popular vape pen out there. And how a vape pen works is you put in a substance like propylene glycol. And if you look at a lot of any sort of hair care products or cleaning products or anything like that, you're going to see propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is used to create fake smoke in theater productions. It also can be in an antifreeze. It's a solvent that goes into these vape pens that then you put the hash oil in with it, so that you can inhale the propylene glycol and the oil. And again, there's no combustion that occurs. But one thing we talk to the students about, we let them feel what propylene glycol feels like. And if you know what it feels like, it's kind of a gross, almost sticky, mineral, oily type of feeling. And we remind them that although there's no combustion, they're still inhaling that into their lungs if they're vaping. And again, this goes for e-cigs too. E-cigs uses the same methodology as like a vape, a marijuana vape pen. So you're inhaling the oil that we saw in the previous picture with propylene glycol, and then you're ingesting that through your lungs. So if you've ever been behind this guy at the car or the stoplight, and there's this huge plume of smoke that comes out, and you're like, how in the world can anyone exhale that much smoke? What they're probably doing is sucking on either an e-cig or some sort of vape pen in front of you, and that's what you're seeing. This is not a combusted material, but it is that really condensed vapor that's coming out of the pen. Have you guys ever seen that in your cars, or is that a Colorado thing? Okay, and are you like, how can that be, how can there be so much smoke coming out of that person's mouth? So it's actually probably a vape situation. It doesn't mean that's marijuana oil in there. It could certainly be an e-cig that they're using, but it is the same principle. So we do talk to our students about how that is not actually the safer choice. We don't know how marijuana in a vape pen mixed with propylene glycol affects the lungs. There's just not the research on the vape. Yes, sir. It doesn't smell like a thing. That's a great question. So what we've seen in Colorado is you have, I had a student who was working in a restaurant, and as soon as the boss turned his head, he could pull out his vape pen, take a couple of hits, exhale it, and nobody knows the difference. There's no scent connected with it. Good question. With the shatter is a little different, but the vape pen not a scent that is connected with it. There is a slight smell if it has oil in it. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so then we have pipes, right? Now here's the deal, you guys. If we're talking about a perception of harm, what's our perception of harm going to be if our pipe looks like this, right? I also, if you want to go on YouTube and find out how to make a highlighter pipe, this is an actual highlighter that you can make a pipe out of. So you have your kids who have this in their backpack. Now, of course, this is going to smell. The highlighter is going to smell because that's burned weed. That's not baked or an oil in there. But certainly, the perception of harm when it's this accessible is going to be diminished. And then we have the MIPS, so the marijuana-infused products. And in Colorado, we started out by just going, the producers could go to the store, get Haribo gummy bears, and spray their THC oil all over those gummy bears. So if I take one and it accidentally has 3 sprays of oil, and my friend takes one and hers only has 1 spray of oil, we're going to have drastically different experiences, and there's no regulation. So what Colorado has done, thank goodness, and on your behalf as well, is created a lot of regulation around the marijuana-infused products. So they can't look like a product that is available for sale as far as candy, although I have a couple of kids, if they found this on the ground, they would certainly pick that up and put that in their mouth. If we have a student in the high school and she's sucking on a lollipop, we're certainly, we're not going to know, all right? Because there is no scent with these either. There's also a new kind of MIP where it's, you know those Lysol breath strips that you can put on your tongue? That's a MIP as well. They start having those, and you can buy those as well. So the perception of harm is very low when we look at this. And again, in Colorado at least, by your average student who's using marijuana, first of all, these are a little bit cost prohibitive, so they're not using a lot of the MIPS. These are much more boutique-y for the tourists who are coming to Colorado to use, and they don't want to inhale, they're not comfortable with inhaling. That's who these are for, and that's who's buying these. I don't see a lot of my students using the MIPS because, again, it's cost prohibitive. They really like to just use the dab on a weekend and then smoke in the morning or before lunch or during lunch or before bed. This is less popular than you might think among the students that I have encountered. And again, that's anecdotal. But however, I have a student that I was working with, and he was a heavy user. And I asked him if he used any sort of edibles, and he said, not really, but I went to work and someone gave me a gummy, and I popped in and I just worked the rest of the day. And but it's not something he would go to the store or the dispensary and buy, or something that he would necessarily seek out. And again, here we have the gummies, and these can no longer be a gummy bear, but they still look like this. So again, I have my kids who first of all, they hate hearing any more about marijuana. They're 10 and 8, and but they know what packaging looks like, and they know not to go to a friend's house and eat brownies that are on the table, and they need to ask a trusted adult. These certainly are available for purchase. And again, if we're talking about the perception of harm, that's what we're looking at. That looks good. I would want to drink that, and I wouldn't think it's a big deal. So myth number 2, it's fine because it's natural. We're busting that. I didn't see any natural plants in any of those pictures or images, okay? And even if I did, I would still not say it's fine. Okay, so myth number 3, it's not as bad as drinking or doing other drugs. And this is always an interesting one because we hear this a lot from our students, not only from our students, but from their parents. So that's why I'm glad you guys are all here. Well, at least he's not doing heroin. So this is a billboard in Denver. And I don't know if you can notice it, but there's a Bud Light billboard right in front of that. Arizona voted on legalization. It did not pass. It's the only state that did not pass this year. But this was a billboard in Arizona. So you guys are just coming off of a marijuana campaign that was heavily funded on both sides. And what has happened, you guys as adult voters got to look at all these images over and over again and make your own decision, but your youth did as well. So the Marijuana Policy Project puts out a lot of these ads, and their voice is to regulate marijuana like alcohol. Certainly that's what passed here in California. So these images and these messages are sent to adult voters, and regardless of how you voted, and the fact that it passed is of no bearing, but the fact that kids have seen these images for the last 8-12 months has to be recognized. So if we're talking about the perception of harm, and this is what the message that we see, we have to also balance that out with a message to our kids that this is different for you. This is different. This is not a youth. This is off the table for youth. And my problem with this ad is that these are both youth in this picture. And here's Alcohol Awareness Month. Does anyone know that April is Alcohol Awareness Month? Who knew? And I'm not sure if we have a Marijuana Awareness Month yet, but probably should be April. All right. So that's the message. And those billboards are still out there. So the gateway drug piece for marijuana is, we always get asked, is marijuana a gateway drug? And I have a really hard time explaining how it can potentially be a gateway drug. So I'm going to do my best. When we have that low perception of harm, and then we have users who are then replacing their anandamide C, and they don't feel that high as much because we build up a tolerance, because what our brain does is then limits the amount of receptors it's going to have, because it doesn't want to get flooded. Our brain always wants to maintain a really good homeostasis. Nothing too high, nothing too low. So it always produces just the right anandamide that we need to function. Now, if we replace that anandamide with THC, our brain is going to get signaled that there's an overload of what it thinks is anandamide, but it's actually THC. So it's going to reduce its production of anandamide, and then potentially can also reduce its receptors. So if we do that, and then we get more and more THC in there, the lows are going to be really low, because we're not going to have anandamide or THC to make us feel good. But we're also going to lose some of those receptors that work. So we're going to need more and more THC to make us feel good. So then all of a sudden we go from smoking weed to doing an edible, to dabbing, because we need more and more of that THC. And then all of a sudden, where do you go from dabbing? What's the next step? So that's when it can become a potential gateway drug for those heavy users. So habitual marijuana users have a twofold increased risk of using other drugs. Habitual marijuana users. And then that lower perception of harm can equal an increased likelihood of being a gateway drug. If we have a high perception of harm, if our youth have a high perception of harm, and it's a really, really big deal, and they're pretty worried about marijuana because they do understand that it can be addictive, then they might try it once or twice. But that perception of harm is going to stay pretty high because they're getting this message. They've seen the brain images. They understand this. And then they're less likely to become a habitual user. So in that case, it's not as much of a gateway drug. So it really depends on the individual and the perception of harm. So the mental health impacts of early, and this is youth marijuana use, can be seen as depression. Again, if we're replacing anandamide with THC, but then when we're not using THC, we don't have anandamide or THC in there, we're going to feel pretty low. And that can come in the form of depression, or it can come in the form of anxiety. And so if we're feeling depressed, there can be an increase in suicidal thoughts and ideation. Now here's the big one. The schizophrenic piece has been proven over and over and over. So early use of marijuana, by early I mean the first window is about 12 to 15, and the second window is about 16 to 20. The schizophrenic piece has been correlated over and over. What they think is if you have a family history or a predisposition of carrying the gene for schizophrenia, you use marijuana at that early age, it can open the floodgates for that potential to have an early, in your 20s, diagnosis of a schizophrenic or a thought disorder. And then beyond that, you want that window of about 10 years to make sure you're through it. But it's real, and it's very impactful. And schizophrenic diagnosis as an adult is not one of the good ones. It sticks around, and it's very debilitating. So the magic numbers are 15 and 25. Use before 15 can have a serious, serious impact. Of course, use between 16 and 25 has a lesser impact, but still significant because that brain is still developing. All right, so it's not as bad as drinking or doing other drugs is busted. It can certainly have an effect. Is it going to kill you? Are you going to overdose on it? Not like a heroin or an opiate type of thing, but it certainly will have its effects. Myth number 4, it's medicine. You guys have been hearing this for a long time here in California. So again, I'm going to introduce the idea of CBD and THC. Specifically, we're going to talk about CBD. Now, when we talk to our youth about this, we have to acknowledge the medicinal benefits of CBD, which are vast and unresearched because there's no federal funding to go into it because it's a Schedule I substance. Federal government cannot put money into researching a Schedule I substance, so we can't research CBD. However, if you look into it, CBD can, I'm going to skip this one, can reduce nausea and vomiting. That's why it works well with people going through chemotherapy or who have some chronic wasting disease. It can suppress seizure activity, especially in youth. So if you ever want to look up Charlotte's Web, that's a strain of marijuana that has about 17.5% CBD and 0.5% THC. And what it's done for this young lady who had a really debilitating seizure disorder has been remarkable. And so there are these value points to the CBD for her. The antipsychotic. So how can it cause schizophrenia but then combats psychosis disorder? So the way it can combat is, first of all, we're talking about CBD here, not just THC. So CBD can balance out that psychosis, and it's also certain strains in certain amounts for certain individuals who have potentially a psychotic disorder or a thought disorder. And then inflammatory. My dad has rheumatoid arthritis. If he wants to, put a CBD patch on or something like that, which he won't, he's very stubborn, but it can certainly help with some inflammatory, neurodegenerative, Parkinson's, MS. It has all kinds of pretty decent research around supporting people with those situations. Combats tumor and cancer cells, which is partially why you don't see a lot of incidents of lung cancer for heavy marijuana smokers, because that CBD component is a growth inhibitor. Okay, and then it can combat anxiety and depression disorders if it's used situationally, not every day like a SSRI or something like that. And that's again strains that are at least have some CBD. But if we're talking about dabbing and we're talking about 98% THC, there's not much room for CBD left in there. So we're not talking about the stuff that kids are using. In Colorado, the #1 strain has about 21% THC, about 2% CBD. Now, for it to operate perfectly the way it's supposed to, if you were, medicinally using it, you would want a lot more CBD and very little THC. question. Yeah, so you might see more incidences of that lung cancer piece if people are smoking upwards of 50% THC without the CBD to balance it out. And the other thing CBD does is balance out that psychotic effect. So that hallucinogenic piece, that really high THC. Did I already say that? I'm saying it again. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, what was the question?
She said, so you're not going to get that anti-cancer piece with the really high THC strains. Yes, good question. So is there a way to separate CBD and THC? So what people are doing, and there's a strain called Charlotte's Web after the girl who has the seizure disorder. What they've done is they've created a strain. It's not that they've actually separated the two structures. They've created a strain, a plant, a mother plant that then they clone that has the very high CBD. So what they do is they do all kinds of the crazy grafting, thank you. And so they create, and they can create, and they can create. That's the same way they can create Blue Dream in Colorado that has 21% THC. They find that perfect plant by doing grafting. So they manipulate all of it. It's a genetically modified paradise. So what you also can get with CBD is, any sort of supplements. You can have a supplement of pure CBD that can help with any sort of a neurodegenerative type of stuff. Again, it hasn't been researched. It's not FDA approved. We're rolling the dice. It's anecdotal at this point. But there is all this anecdotal evidence, and again, it can be researched if it's privately funded or state funded, but not federally funded. And so you can have all this research, but it isn't going to be a federally funded or FDA approved type of substance. Okay? So it's medicine. Myth number 4 is plausible. It can be medicine for some people because there certainly is the medicinal value, but a lot of the kids who are using and taking advantage of that are not using it medicinally. Right, so myth number 5, it's not addictive, and we hear that often. So the DSM-5, and I need to go to my notes here for this one because I don't want to get it wrong. About 9% of adults and about 14% of youth, and these are old statistics. They're a couple years old, so this might change. Can identify as being addicted to marijuana. And certainly that's going to increase as concentrates and that concentrated THC increases. And again, this is the most heavily used substance in the United States, illicit substance, although it's not necessarily illicit if we pass Prop 64. However, if you have 9% of people who are addicted to the most commonly used substance, that's still a huge chunk of people, right? If you have 14% of youth who are addicted, then that's still a lot of youth. So the DSM would say that, like I said, I want to make sure I get this right. So it would suggest that having dependence would have 3 or more of the following characteristics. A need for markedly increased amount of marijuana or THC to achieve intoxication or desired effects. A markedly diminished effect on the user with continued use of the same amount. So again, those are both tolerance. And then a great deal of time is spent on activities necessary to obtain the substance, use the substance, or recover from its effects. So we are thinking, how much time are you thinking about it, recovering from it, or using it? And then they're also increasing their tolerance. So again, coming back into this, anytime you introduce something into the brain that the brain already makes naturally, you're going to create a dependence on it because the brain is going to step back its production of that natural neurotransmitter. So there's going to be a dependence on it. It just depends on the kid or the individual and their propensity for potentially, addiction. And then it's going to depend on how often they're using it and how much they're introducing it into their brain. But we're replacing a substance the brain naturally makes by an externally introduced substance. So what does marijuana addiction look like? A person can't stop using even though it interferes with his or her daily life, including relationships, school, and career, and it may create legal problems. This is any addiction. This is alcohol addiction. This is any sort of addiction. When it starts interfering with your daily life and you can't stop it. And then there's negative consequences. So then we can also look at a social, mental, and physical addiction. So with our youth, we see the social addiction piece, which is they could not imagine hanging out with their group of friends without smoking weed. That's a social addiction. The mental addiction is I can't even imagine what my anxiety would be or my depression would be if I didn't have weed, okay? And the physical addiction is interesting too. Anandamide is important to have healthy sleep. And so if we are, a lot of kids use marijuana to go to sleep. And if they are, so that's a physical addiction. And ultimately, we need to get the THC out of there, increase that anandamide production so that they can get back into a regular sleep routine. With the students I'm working with, when they're coming off of their dependence on marijuana, they can report really strange dreams. And they're like, man, coming off of weed makes me have strange dreams. And I'm saying, no, you're just not, you're sleeping at this level. You're not going into that really, really, really deep sleep where you don't remember your dreams. And so there's this physical addiction, and it's legit. If you have youth who are saying they're using it to get to sleep, it's legit. It just also means they need to stop the weed and rebuild their anandamide production. And the way to do that is to get good sleep and then to eat your, a good dose of healthy green vegetables and that sort of stuff, which, as we know, adolescents always love to do, right? All right, so then there's some withdrawal. We have irritability, mood and sleep difficulties, anger and irritation, and decreased appetite, cravings to use, and restlessness, okay? And none of those, we don't see any of those with our adolescents, right? But here's the deal. Unlike alcohol, unlike an opiate withdrawal, there is not a medical situation. These are relatively mild, not to the person experiencing them, but the withdrawal issues that come along are relatively mild. These symptoms tend to peak within the first week of quitting and then subside to a more comfortable level within 2 weeks. So if we can get our youth through those first 2 weeks, and then in 90 days, their anandamide production is back to normal, back to the normal rates before they started using so heavily. So myth number 5, it's not addictive, is busted. I'm busting that one. All right, myth number 6, it's fine because it's legal. It's not for you. And our poor youth are coming of age in a time when weed is legal. Now, you adults, can you even imagine growing up in a time when marijuana is legal? I know a bazillion friends of mine who would be so excited to be in this situation right now, who worked for this. They were wearing the shirts and marching, legalize marijuana. And now here we are. And our youth are coming of age in this. So it's a different ballgame for us. So what's currently legal? And I'm going to, let's see. So in 1996, California passed the Compassionate Use Act, and that allows patients and caregivers to legally use, possess, and grow cannabis. Now this includes under 18. So anyone who has their medical card here in California and they're under 18 needed to get a parent or guardian signature and 2 doctors to sign off on that. That's the same as in Colorado. Then, if you're over 18, you can get your card with 1 doctor's signature. All right? And so again, parental permission is required under the age of 18. And so you can have, and since 1996, youth in California can have their medical card regardless of how old they are if they have a parent's signature and 2 physicians signing off on that. Now, in California, you can be 21 and over, and you can smoke weed recreationally. You can buy it and you can smoke it. So again, that's 21 and under. the medical part still stands. So you can get your card if you're under 18 with two doctor signatures and one parent. If you're over 18, you can get your card with one doctor signature, no parent.